Good morning. That was Stephen Bautista. Stephen Bautista has done worship services here at St. Mark's a number of times. And that was from his Christmas album. The first song on the Christmas album is called A Wondrous Journey. And it's about Jesus getting ready to take that wondrous journey to earth to save mankind. That's a wonderful album, I think, that we bought from the Bautistas when they were here, and we've pulled it out at Christmas time. I don't know if you're like we are at home. We have our Christmas music, and there it is. And when it gets to be December, then it's time, Not that we would have to wait until that time, but it's one of those things we look forward to, listening to that Christmas music. Are there any connections from the study of Daniel to Advent? Is this an odd time of the year to be talking about Daniel? No? Good, I'm glad you're thinking that way. There are connections, and maybe you could even come up with some of them. When you think of the arrogance and the pride of the Babylonian kings, and contrast that with the humble birth of Jesus, the King of Heaven, I think that there certainly is. You call it a connection, or maybe there's a contrast, but one reminds me of the other because they're such opposites. And I also this week was thinking about the humility of Mary. And you remember when the angel Gabriel came? The angel came to Mary and said, "You're going to be the mother of the Savior." Mary was, of course, surprised. But she was inspired, Mary was inspired to write that song, which has been called the Magnificat, Mary's song. It's recorded for us in Luke chapter 1. And I was remembering parts of the Magnificat that had to do with actually things like the kingdom of Babylon. These are some of Mary's words here from Luke chapter 1. I'm starting with verse 52. And you could look it up or just listen in on this. But Mary's talking about how God has performed mighty deeds with his arm. He has scattered those who are proud in their inmost thoughts. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. He has filled the hungry with good things, but has sent the rich away empty. And so the humility of Mary reminds us, in contrast, it contrasts with the utter pride and arrogance of the Babylonian kings. There's one other example of humility that I think we should think about during Advent, and that is what about the wise men? Do you know that historians believe that the wise men were from the Far East, from Babylon perhaps? How could that be, that people that believed in the messianic promises of Jesus, that they knew about those prophecies and then came to worship the Messiah? And did they come from Babylon? I'm not sure. The Bible just tells us that they came from the east. But if you think about the history there, the Jewish people were in exile in Babylon for 70 years, and many of the Jews didn't come back. They stayed in Babylon. Was it wrong for them to stay in Babylon when they were finally told, you can go back? It was one of the kings of, actually the Medes and the Persians, King Cyrus, that said, he encouraged them to go back to their homes. And he even made large donations to rebuild the temple and the walls of the city of Jerusalem. That was one of the Persian kings that did that. But anyway, a lot of the Jews didn't return. Some of them did. Should they have returned? I don't think it was wrong for them to stay in Babylon. There may have been many believers in Babylon by that time. Yes, Ed.
It's tragic that those in Babylon could see the prophecy. Those in Jerusalem couldn't see it.
Yeah, is it?
Rejected in Jerusalem, but yet foreigners saw the prophecy and came to see it.
Mm-hmm. Is that one of those examples of how the gospel shower goes from one place to another? And throughout history, you kind of see that. There are examples of that. One of the examples in more recent times would be the fact that the gospel flourished in Europe, in old Europe. And then when apostasy or falling away began in Europe, where did people go? They came to America. They came to America. So the gospel shower moved from Europe to America. And who knows if it's going to go somewhere else again, and maybe it's starting to already. Something kind of a sobering thought, the gospel shower does move, and the Bible prophesies that too. It moves from place to place. Now, when you think of Babylon, certainly the gospel was there. It was present through strong believers like Daniel, who proclaimed the good news and testified about the greatness of God. Even after the Jews back in the homeland were falling away from God. Yes, Jerry.
I would think that the Jews had a better opportunity to share God's word in Babylon than they would have with all the other Jews.
They had Jesus in their midst and they didn't recognize it.
Yeah. Well, it's debatable where the best opportunity to spread the gospel was, but
Believers in Babylon because they believed in another.
oh, okay. So from the standpoint of Babylon being a mission field at that time, yeah, I would totally agree with you there. And sometimes areas that have the blessing of the gospel start to take it for granted, and they end up despising it, and then it goes away. And another place benefits from it. It would be wonderful if every place that received that special blessing of having faithful proclaimers of the word, faithful prophets, and the gospel messages there, and then it would become strong and remain strong. It should, and then just continue to spread and grow. Yeah, well, I know the cathedrals are empty in Germany.
Talking about during Hitler's reign.
Yeah, even worse, they were persecuted.
I think Germany and Europe is kind of like the heart.
Mm-hmm. Well, the land of Luther, Germany. If you went to early service, and if you're going to late service, it's fine too, because the Wells Connection features a historic church in Milwaukee, St. John's Church. And I have seen that church. It's magnificent. Downtown Milwaukee. And what did they say in the video? That church seats 1,100 people. Now, St. Mark's seats comfortably, I think, at least 300.
325.
325, thank you. Okay. So 3 to 4 times as many people comfortably seated at St. John's, Milwaukee. That church no longer has, 1,200 people. In fact, I have read that at one time that church had over 2,000 members. It's incredible. And the baptisms that went through there, hundreds of, imagine the marriages and funerals, and so on, all of that at St. John's, Milwaukee. That church is still there. It is on the historical register of buildings, which enables them to have funding to keep the building in good repair. And so, anyway, that was interesting for me to see that video of that church, because I have seen that church, and One day I wanted to tour it, and it was closed at that time. But it has been reopened.
The founders of Wells came from Germany?
Yes. That church was not the original founding church of the Wells, but there were 3 Lutheran pastors who gathered at Grace Church in Milwaukee, which is not too far from there. And they were the ones that organized the Wisconsin Synod in 1850. And that video was talking about the year 2025, which will be the 175th anniversary year of our synod. Ed, do you have a comment?
2 points. There are more Lutherans in Africa than in America.
Yes.
That is a fact. Second point, in about 1942 or 43, the Missouri Synod had if you remember who Dr. Walter A. Meyer was?
I do not.
He was
Sorry.
a Lutheran hour preacher.
Oh, the Lutheran Hour? Oh, okay, yeah.
They had a service in Soldier Field in Chicago. 70,000 Lutherans showed up.
Wow.
In Chicago. In the 40s.
Yeah.
That's not happening today.
No, it certainly is not.
In Wisconsin. What's the N word?
Michigan and Minnesota. Yeah, the Midwest, another M word. Yeah. Well, you know, this St. John's, Milwaukee, I don't want to go off too much on St. John's, Milwaukee, but because that's not our topic for today, but that church, the number of members it has today is under 100. Under 100. So what has happened in Milwaukee? Well, the demographics of Milwaukee have changed so much that a lot of the Lutherans have poured out of the city, and they belong to Milwaukee metro communities like, I'll just say Bethlehem, Menominee Falls, which is where Pastor Colander was before he came here. But there are large congregations on the outlying areas of Milwaukee. The inner city of Milwaukee no longer has as many Lutheran churches, and certainly not as many large Lutheran churches. They used to say that you could walk out of one Lutheran church in Milwaukee and look down the street at the steeple, and that was another one. And they were just, and not only Wisconsin Synod, but Missouri Synod churches as well. At the time, Missouri and Wisconsin were in fellowship. So it was an incredible history of how the gospel flourished in Milwaukee, but some of those churches are no longer what they once were. That's a change of demographics. Chuck, I saw your hand before. Go ahead.
When was St. John's built?
1889.
Was it? Okay. 1889. I didn't catch that on the video. All right. So I want to get to our Bible study topic today, which is actually lessons 6 and 7 of Daniel, the book of Daniel. So do you think I'm going to get through two of them, lesson 6 and lesson 7? Let's see what happens. This is the final lesson of the Daniel Bible study, and it will conclude the historical part of Daniel's book. The historical part of Daniel's book is based on chapters 1 through 6, and then chapters 7 through 12 are revelations, visions. Although one of the visions, the vision that was given to Nebuchadnezzar, was in chapters 1 through 6. Anyway, let's look at the study guide. There is a new study guide in the entryway. I imagine most of you got one. There's a separate page for lesson 5, and then this last one is a combination of lessons 6 and 7. So this lesson is about King Belshazzar's dinner and his doom. The setting, time, and place is easier understood if you look at the Babylonian succession of kings, and so I laid that out for you here, and I'll go through that quickly. So the date is 539 BC. This is about 30 years after the incident recorded in Lesson 5, which was Nebuchadnezzar's boasting and his temporary insanity, his madness. And since Daniel arrived in Babylon in 605 BC, as close as historians have been able to figure that out, that was when Daniel came, because that is when the first exile of Jews from Jerusalem occurred. So that was 605 BC, and he was a young man at that time. So if you do the math on the years, that would place Daniel as a person of about 80 years old by this time, more or less, 80 years old. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly how old he was at that time, but he must have been a senior citizen by that time. So leadership has changed in the Babylonian Empire. The years of the Chaldean dynasty, the Babylonian dynasty, Chaldean sometimes it's called, were from 626 to 539 BC. Histories agree on this. There's a lot of history that has been found and uncovered by archaeologists, and also history that was written down by Greek and even Roman historians later on about the Babylonians and the Persians who followed. So the kings, the succession of kings, the first of their kings was Nabopolassar. Nabopolassar was Nebuchadnezzar the first. He ruled until 605 BC. Nebuchadnezzar the second, this is the guy that we've been talking about. Nebuchadnezzar the second, 605 to 562 BC. He was Nabopolassar's son. And then things changed a lot after that. The next king was named Marduk. And he was, I researched this, I had to find that out. He was one of Nebuchadnezzar II's many sons. There was a list of them, probably about 10 of them. And for some reason, he was the one picked to be Nebuchadnezzar's successor. By the way, the name Amel means evil man. That's what it means. It means evil man of Marduk. And Marduk was the Babylonian god of creation. So evil man of creation. Anyway, he didn't last long. He died only 2 years after he became king. He was historians say that he was murdered by his brother-in-law. He was murdered by his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law was the husband of one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters, if you can follow that. And an ambitious brother-in-law who was an Aramaean official, his name was Neriglissar. Who knows if I'm pronouncing those names correctly? I'm doing the best I can. Neriglissar, who ruled from 560 to 556 BC. And then he was followed by Nabonidus. And Nabonidus is the second last one on the list there. Nabonidus was also connected to the royal family by marriage. He was the final king of the Chaldean dynasty. However, history records that Nabonidus installed his oldest son, and that's Belshazzar, to be a co-ruler or co-regent in 553 BC. Meanwhile, Nabonidus moved to Arabia and allowed Belshazzar to rule in Babylon. So you had two kings at that time. And the Bible calls this king, Nabonidus' son, calls him Belshazzar. So Belshazzar was the oldest son of Nabonidus. He was the son of Nitocris, daughter of Nebuchadnezzar. Means he was a member of the royal family, and Belshazzar and Nabonidus together were the last kings of the Chaldean dynasty. All right. Now, the other part of the setting here is that when Belshazzar had this vision, which is described in Daniel 5, when he had this vision, the army of the Medes and the Persians was there. And it's puzzling that he was so flippant, so careless, to have some kind of drunken celebration. It's almost as if he didn't care or he wasn't worried. But the enemy armies were there outside the city, and yet he's partying. And so that's the setting. It says, my last bullet before number 2 is this was a critical time for Babylon because the Medo-Persian army had invaded weeks earlier. The capital city was in danger, but King Belshazzar seemed unconcerned and oblivious to the impending fall of his kingdom. All right, that's our situation. Now, the Bible readings. We're going to have these read over the PA system again. So Daniel 5, verses 1 through 4, please, Keith.
Chapter 5. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
So there's evidence that this was more than just a social event, but that it had religious overtones. I'm going to read a little bit from the People's Bible. This is by John Jeske about this situation. Again, I'm reading from the People's Bible written by Professor John Jeske. The king must have begun to feel the influence of the wine because he lost all sense of decency and decided to desecrate the vessels captured from God's temple in Jerusalem. Chapter 1 records the fact that a half century earlier, when Nebuchadnezzar returned home with the plunder of Jerusalem and its temple, he placed the sacred temple vessels into the house of his God. Now Belshazzar ordered those goblets of gold and silver to be brought to the banquet hall so that he and his nobles, his wives, and concubines could use them as wine glasses. The temple at Jerusalem was the dwelling place where the true God had established his earthly dwelling. There he spoke to the people through his word. There he met people with his mercy. There his people approached him with their confession of sin and with their plea for forgiveness. At this temple, God's people brought blood sacrifices through which God assured them of forgiveness and through which they dedicated their lives to him. The temple in Jerusalem and every piece of its equipment had been dedicated to Jehovah, set aside for his holy purposes. In his prayer to God, on the day of dedication, King Solomon had clearly stated the purpose of the temple and everything associated with its worship. And Solomon said this is from 1 Kings 8:43, that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you. And so then for Belshazzar to use these vessels to praise the gods of Babylon was evidence of worship of the false gods of Babylon. So it was idolatry, and it was also a mockery. It was a mockery of the true God. Alistair Begg says that Belshazzar is a vivid example of the general rule of humanity that the Apostle Paul wrote about in Romans chapter 1. I'd like you to turn to Romans 1 if you would. Since Romans is the first epistle of Paul recorded in the New Testament, I didn't research this, so I'm assuming that it's the first one that he wrote. The introduction says that Paul wrote this in 56 or 57 AD. And so maybe it wasn't the first one he wrote, but it is the introduction, the very first part of his letter to the Romans. And Paul there talks about, starting in verse 18, God's wrath against mankind. And we're about to see God's wrath against mankind in the case of the Babylonians and Belshazzar. But look at verse 18. And could I have a reader for that? Verses 18 through 20. Volunteer, please. Somebody. Go ahead, Jerry. Thank you. That's okay. Go ahead.
For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in righteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath shewed it into them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world we are clearly seeing, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they were without excuse.
Okay. So far. So the point of that is to remind us that God has made it clear to his people on earth who he is and who is sovereign. And yet, so often we see the people of the world despising God. And Belshazzar and the Babylonians were an example of that. But Paul points out that they are without excuse, and their judgment is coming. In this case, with the Babylonian, it was coming pretty fast. All right, so let's go on to number 3. We're on the second page. We're on the second page of the study guide now. Number 3, how did the mood of Belshazzar's feast change when the mysterious writing appeared on the wall? Let's have the next reading, Keith, please. Daniel 5, starting with verse 5.
Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled.
Okay, so the inscription changed Belshazzar's attitude from bold blasphemer to one who was shaking with fear. You ever hear the expression, people shaking in their boots? Well, he's shaking so that his knees are knocking together. So it does say that he became pale with fright, he shook with fear, and now he calls in his magicians and his wise men again. I shouldn't say again, but it's kind of like Nebuchadnezzar doing that. What rewards did the king offer to the one who could decipher the writing? 2 things. Steve?
Worldly goods, chain and the purple cloth. And then third highest rank.
Does the third highest ranking?
Highest.
So you have that co-regency, Belshazzar and who was it, Nabonidus? And he would be third. Okay. Yeah. So big rewards offered to the person who could do that, and still the empire's wisest men could not read or interpret the writing. And Jeske comments about this by saying that God deliberately withheld any ability to do that. Maybe wise people could have figured out what this was saying, but they were not going to be allowed to even attempt to explain it. And they just had to admit, we can't do it. And so the queen advised Belshazzar Let's see what the queen says. First of all, before we have that reading from Daniel 5, starting with verse 10, commentary says that this was most likely the queen mother. I don't know how they know that, but anyway, the queen, verse 10. Let's have the next reading, please.
The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. "May the king live forever," she said. "Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means." So Daniel was brought before the king. And the king said to him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom."
I suppose it wouldn't have been wrong for Daniel to accept the reward for his services, but he refused it. And is there any reason that you can think of why he might have refused it? Maybe that's kind of an obvious question to ask, but go ahead, Penny.
Who would want to be third in the country when you have an enemy right outside the door?
Well, I didn't think of that, but I think you're right. Anybody else? Any other reasons? Yeah.
The king is calling them the gods, not the God. And Daniel knew that he wasn't going to have his hand involved in these pagan gods.
Okay. Steve?
He's been around a long time and has seen a lot of things from the kings of Babylon. I don't think he trusted this guy for 2 seconds. Plus, they keep screwing up. People and to make interpretations. Why do I want any of this stuff? The Lord will take care of me.
Yeah, I don't think Daniel was going to. We know that he was not going to sugarcoat the interpretation to make it seem pleasant for the king, and maybe that's why he wasn't going to accept any reward. Just in case they might say, "Well, you're interpreting it this way because you want the reward." And that's the first thing that Daniel said: take your money and keep it. I'm not interested in it. And instead, what he's going to do, he's not going to sugarcoat, he's not going to make it sound easy for King Belshazzar. He is going to preach a message of law here. And even when the law is heard by believers, it's a tough thing to hear. And this is the law being preached to an unbeliever, and it will be a difficult message, and the consequences will be severe. It's obvious that Belshazzar was shaking in his boots. He was afraid, but Daniel's not going to soft pedal this. He's going to tell him the truth. As Steve said, he's been around the block before. He's had to give this type of message under other circumstances. Okay, so let's go on and see what Daniel says about the words written on the wall. Daniel 5, verses 25 to 28.
Then Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and sets over them anyone he wishes. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription.
Let's continue and have the rest of this part too, up through verse 28.
This is the inscription that was written. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Here's what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
All right, so your days are numbered. You've been weighed and been found wanting, and your kingdom is going to be divided and given to the Medes and Persians. The interpretation is very clear. It's pretty blunt. And the interesting thing is here that after Daniel interpreted this, then it didn't take too long before that actually happened. And we'll see as we go on with the last couple of verses that it happened that very night. The dream or the vision was fulfilled. Okay, let's conclude the chapter with verses 29 through 31.
Then, at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62.
All right. So the consequences were immediate. It reminded me of the final judgment, when Jesus will return, and it will happen just at that moment, and there will be no going back, no more changing. It's even this chapter is even kind of a frightening thing for maybe for believers, but it doesn't have to be frightening for believers, because we know that we have been redeemed, and by trusting in Jesus, we will not experience that kind of judgment. Instead, I have to think that the final judgment for Christians will be a moment of immediate joy. I think that we won't be uncertain. We won't be shaking and our knees banging together when the final judgment comes. It will be immediate, but it will be immediately the reward of heaven for those who believe. It's a terrifying thing for unbelievers. You would think that those who study the book of Daniel would find it to be a rather sobering picture of the final judgment. All right, any comments before we go on? John, go ahead.
Looking at this, you know that Daniel wasn't at the feast, and yet he can until God revealed to him what happened during the feast. Because Daniel doesn't get there until it's all over with. And then you even get the sense from this is the inscription that was written, that Daniel didn't even see the handwriting on the wall, but he knew what it was because God had revealed it to him.
So are you thinking that the inscription disappeared after it appeared?
No, it didn't even have to disappear. You know, they were...
He knew it anyway.
And was, going to take Daniel over to see it, but Daniel, it was like he did for King Belshazzar what he did for Nebuchadnezzar. He interpreted the dream without the dream even being told to him by the king. And I think that probably, if you think about it, that really would have made an impression on Belshazzar, because Daniel could tell him what happened during the feast, that you guys were using the temple goblets, and basically you're toast, and so Belshazzar knew it.
And did you notice that Belshazzar rewarded him anyway? Yes.
And he didn't rebuke him. He didn't say, no, that's not true. That can't be true. I'm the king. Instead, he rewards him anyway, hoping with that reward that Daniel would somehow save him in some way. That reward to Daniel would keep him from the depths of the dead.
You could say that this was a final opportunity for Belshazzar to repent. God already knew that he wasn't going to repent. Well, anyway, this is the second last chapter of the historical part, and the last part is Daniel 6. There's no way we're going to get through that in the next 10 minutes. So I'm going to comment and say a few things about Daniel chapter 6, and then we'll wrap it up. When Daniel was thrown into the den of lions, there's a new king on the throne. Belshazzar is dead. There's a new kingdom ruled by the Medes and the Persians, and Darius, the Persian, was the king at this time. And we see that Darius is at other times called Cyrus here, and it is the same person. I can't really explain why one time is called, the king is called Darius, and the other time it's called Cyrus. Although there are some theories about that. If you look at number 1 under lesson 7 on page 4, going down to the third bullet there, it says histories list Cyrus as the king at this time, 538 BC, but Daniel calls the king by the name Darius. And John Jeske in the People's Bible suggests several solutions to this identity problem, the two-name thing. And we don't know for sure, but these are some theories out there. First of all, number 1 says Darius may be a name given to the title of an office. In other words, Darius. There were other Persian kings named Darius, and there were others that were called Cyrus. And I'm pretty sure that there were others that were called Xerxes too, even though those aren't mentioned right here, but they are mentioned in the book of Esther. So there are some common names that were used for the kings of the Persians. Point number 2, in ancient times, the rulers were often known by more than one name. And some scholars believe that Darius was another name for Gubaru, whom Cyrus appointed as king or governor over Babylon. And that would mean that there's a Cyrus and there's a Darius, and they both ruled over parts of the kingdom. They were both called king. That's a possibility too. And finally, number 4, one scholar, D.J. Wiseman, argues persuasively that Darius is simply another name for, it should be Cyrus himself, not Darius himself. Darius is simply another name for Cyrus himself. We don't know for sure. We do know that Darius is addressed as the king. as the king of that region of Babylon. Now, Daniel's role in the government was, again, at this time, a very high function, the third highest in the kingdom. However, the Persians set it up, but Daniel was still serving at a high level. And if you look at page 5 at the top, Daniel's job performance was exemplary. And there's a reminder for us here, too, that God's people can serve and serve well, even when a government is led by ungodly rulers. Godly people can still serve. Daniel did it, and you might wonder how he was able to do that. How was he able to serve a nation or a king who was an idolater? But Daniel was able to praise God, and he did not compromise. He did not compromise himself while he was doing it. In fact, this situation that arises is something that comes about because of jealousy of other officials who they wanted to discredit Daniel. They wanted to bring him down. And so they got Darius to make this decree, and it would be that for 30 days, no one was to worship or pray to anyone except to the king. So again, it was a command to practice idolatry. And they said, and O king, you need to write this down. And why? Why should he write it down? The decree should be written. Greg. Because then it would be an unalterable law. As they said, and sometimes we even use this expression today, it's the law of the Medes and the Persians, right? That cannot be altered, it cannot be changed. And they reminded the king of this after they caught Daniel praying to his God 3 times a day. They said, aha, now we're reporting to you, O king, that Daniel did this. And you have to punish him as you said, because the law cannot be changed. And of course, then the king was sorry. But we know the story that it's pointed out, and Alistair Begg does a good job of pointing out that this is a story that is so commonly used as a story for little kids. Is this really a little kid's topic? You know, burning somebody in the lion's den? Well, Daniel didn't burn, but he was tossed in. That was the intent. But sometimes you have, Daniel is portrayed as a helpless person, which he was, and he was trusting in God. And the cute little lions are made friendly in the lion's den. These are ferocious lions who are probably hungry and would have torn anyone to pieces. So it's not really a story for little kids, although there is a lesson for everyone, no matter what age we are. The story of Daniel is a good one for us to hear. And I want to just skip ahead to on page 6 and wrap things up by taking a look at what Alistair Begg says in his book, Brave by Faith. It's on page 6, the middle of the page, and I want to read that as a concluding remark. I think it's pretty much spot on, especially in the way that Alistair Begg talks about the 2 tombs. You know, Daniel's tomb from which he was rescued, and Jesus' tomb from which he rescued himself on Easter Sunday. Let's notice the comparison here. Okay, so Daniel emerged alive from the place that should have been his tomb. At this moment, our thoughts are thrown forward across the centuries to another early morning and another place of death, sealed by a stone rolled over its entrance, and another man who was innocent of failing to obey God. The lion's den, a place of deliverance for Daniel, reminds us that Jesus' tomb is the ultimate place of deliverance for all who trust in him. In moments when we face trouble and difficult choices between loyalty to the prevailing winds of our culture and loyalty to God, don't look forward with a sense of dread. Don't look back over your shoulder and pine for the supposed good old days. Don't run away and try to remove yourself from a pagan culture. Remember to lift your eyes to a greater king, and you will be equipped to serve well in every way you can, and to stand firm when you must. The empty tomb reminds us of the kind of God whom we serve, one who is worthy of our praise, one who has delivered and will deliver us, and around whose throne one day we will stand with Daniel and sing, not for ourselves, nor of Daniel, but of him. So take heart and remember, God always wins. As Jesus said, John 16, verse 33, in this world you will have much trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. That's Jesus foreshadowing his final victory. And when he said, it is finished, he took care of it all for us. That's where we'll conclude today, and as we wrap up this Bible study. I thank you for your attendance and your attention to the topic. And I'll just say, as this is my last Bible study here at St. Mark's, that it has been a privilege for me to do this. I can't even describe how that. Thank you. It's very, very kind. I just want you to know that when people who have the opportunity to share the Word of God, when we do that, it's really a privilege. And I think we are the ones that benefit the most from it. And I've loved doing this with you, for you, and especially for the glory of God. So thank you very much, and God bless all of you. I don't remember the title of it, but there was something in the newsletter which is online. There's a paper copy of that out in the entryway, and you can find it there.
The 15th, we're going to meet in the...
Yes. Because next week is the children's Christmas service. We won't be able to use the sanctuary here for Bible class, and so that one will be in the chapel. Is that right?
And then on the 22nd at 8:30, we're going to have the service at 9:30. That's what he had in the newsletter.
Okay. Yeah, take a look at the newsletter. It describes what's going to be happening in the weeks to come. All right. Thank you.